The cold hum of the city filtered through the cracked window, mingling with the hiss of an old radiator that never quite worked right. Inside the cramped studio apartment, silence reigned except for the rhythmic tapping of fingers on a worn-out keyboard. The room was dim, lit only by the blue glow of a laptop screen and the occasional flicker of headlights passing by outside. He sat hunched over the desk, eyes red from sleepless nights, back stiff from hours without motion. A coffee mug, stained and chipped, stood as the only decoration beside an overturned photograph whose frame had long since lost its shine. Outside, the rain began. Slow at first, then steadier tapping against the glass like a whisper from the past. He ignored it. The code had to be finished. There was a bug in the payment module that refused to resolve, and time wasn't on his side. Time hadn't been on his side in years. He paused, reached toward the photo without looking, then stopped halfway and drew his hand back. No, not tonight. Not again. His phone buzzed. He glanced over, just another notification. But something about the name made his throat tighten. He reached for it slowly. A single message glowed on the screen from a mutual college acquaintance. She just got engaged. To the guy she left you for. He didn't move for a long moment. Just stared at the message. The room suddenly colder. The fingers holding the phone trembled. There was no anger in his expression. No sudden eruption of grief. Just a quiet kind of stillness. Like a wound long scarred, pressed once again by a familiar blade dot. It had been 4 years since she walked out of his life. Back then, things were different. He had dreams, wild and beautiful, building a company from nothing, designing something the world hadn't seen before. She used to call him her genius, laugh when he forgot to eat while coding, stay up late just to bring him tea when he burned the midnight oil. They'd sit on the hostel rooftop and imagine a future together, bright and filled with endless possibilities. She believed in him once, until someone else came along. He remembered it too well, the day she stopped believing. The day he walked into the campus cafe and saw her sitting across from another man, laughing in a way she hadn't with him in weeks. The man wore a blazer that looked expensive, a watch that shimmered even under the low lights. Their hands nearly touched across the table. He stood there, invisible, long enough to understand everything without a word being said. Later that night, she didn't even deny it. "I need more than promises," she said. "You keep saying someday. I can't wait forever." He had no response, only silence. Only the faint sound of his heart cracking open. She walked away, and something inside him shattered, not just love, but belief. In people, in the idea that loyalty meant something, that love could be patient. The silence of her absence rang louder than any goodbye. The first few months were a blur. He stopped attending classes, locked himself away, deleting photos one by one until only empty albums remained. He unfollowed her everywhere, but she kept appearing on friends' stories, on engagement photos, on event flyers, with that rich boy's arm around her like a trophy. She became someone else, someone glittering and unreachable, like a star he could no longer afford to look at. Yet he never cursed her. He cursed himself. The night after the engagement message, he sat still for hours. He could hear the radiator hissing like it was mocking him. Finally, he stood up, walked to the tiny mirror by the sink, and looked at himself. He was thinner, eyes sunken, stubble rough. A man shaped more by losses than gains, but there was still fire in those eyes. He grabbed his notebook and wrote 4 words: "Build it without her." That night marked a shift. He pulled open every old file, every pitch deck, every half-written idea he once believed in. He stopped trying to erase the past and instead started rewriting his future. No one was coming to save him. No one was going to hand him millions or whisper encouragements when he failed. This was his alone to do or die trying. He got a job as a night clerk at a tech repair shop. During the day, he coded in libraries, lived off instant noodles, and learned the brutal art of persistence. He failed repeatedly. He pitched investors who laughed at him, walked out of meetings in cheap shirts, while others walked in with polished smiles and well-connected family names. But he kept moving. There were nights he slept on the office floor of a shared workspace. Days when his hands shook from hunger, when the electricity got cut off, when the old laptop gave up. But he always found a way, borrowing, fixing, hacking together what he could. Every small win, a new user, a compliment on his UI design. A beta tester who loved the prototype felt like a brick in a slowly rising tower. He stopped checking her profile, stopped measuring himself against a man who had everything handed to him. He started measuring against who he was yesterday. Still, sometimes in the quiet, he'd hear her voice. That night on the rooftop, "You'll change the world someday." And then the voice in the cafe, "I need more than promises." The contradiction haunted him. But maybe that was what kept him going. Late one evening, he sat alone again, nearly 2 years since the breakup. The startup had its first 50 users. An angel investor had just emailed interest. It wasn't much, but it was momentum. He pulled out the same notebook and wrote a single line beneath his old entry. "She left me for a rich boy. I will become something no one can ever walk away from again." Outside, the rain had stopped. A thin beam of moonlight cut through the clouds, casting a soft glow on the desk, the screen, and the photo frame that had lain face down for so long. Slowly, he reached out and flipped it over. The photo showed 2 young faces smiling into the sun. A different time. A different boy. A girl who had once believed in him. He looked at it for a moment, then stood, walked to the window, and opened it. The city stretched wide below, harsh, unforgiving, alive. Somewhere out there, she was planning her wedding. Somewhere else, people like him were trying and failing and getting up again. He placed the photo on the windowsill. Not with bitterness, not with love, just with quiet acceptance. Then he turned back to the screen and opened a new document. The cursor blinked, waiting, and he began to type, not code this time, but a letter to himself. A letter that began not with heartbreak, but with resolve. There was still pain, still hunger, still miles to go, but he was no longer the boy she left behind. Every morning began the same way. Before the city stirred, before the sun dared touch the glass of that narrow basement office, he was already awake, not because of discipline, but necessity. The grind didn't wait. He showered quickly, brushed his teeth while skimming emails, and boiled coffee that tasted more like grit than comfort. There was no time for luxury. He had 1 suit, 3 shirts, and a laptop that had survived 3 years longer than it should have at 25. He was older than his years, worn from the inside out. But he carried a fire, quiet but unwavering. He had taught himself how to listen to silence, how to drown the doubts in movement. Failure had become familiar, but not permanent. It only knocked. It didn't get to stay. The startup, once a name on paper, now had a prototype. It wasn't pretty. It crashed sometimes. The design was clumsy, but it worked, sort of. Enough to show someone. He had spent months refining it in coffee shops, dodging rent calls, and sleeping on the couch of a college friend who never asked questions. He learned to pitch with passion, not polish. To make people see what it could be, not just what it was. He walked into his 10th investor meeting wearing the same charcoal blazer that didn't quite fit. Hands clammy, but voice steady. He showed slides, described vision, talked about long-term scaling and impact. A man across the table nodded politely, offered a tight-lipped smile, and finally said, "You've got ambition. But I need to invest in teams, not dreams." Another. Door closed. He left the building and didn't curse. He didn't cry. He sat on a bench, opened his laptop, and went over the pitch again. It wasn't good enough. Yet. But it would be dot. There were nights when the hunger came, not just for food, but for validation. Some nights he'd pass those upscale restaurants where the rich gathered, where laughter echoed like victory bells. Through glass windows, he'd see couples leaning across candlelit tables, hands intertwined. And sometimes, just sometimes, he thought he saw her face. But it never was. He hadn't said her name in over a year. Not aloud. She had become a symbol. No, not of betrayal, but of a lesson. He used to hate the way memory could turn into a weapon. But now, he had made peace with it. The past was a furnace. It burned, yes, but it forged as well. One afternoon, a message appeared in his inbox. It was short. A woman investor had seen his pitch deck forwarded through a colleague. She wanted to talk. No guarantees, no promises. Just 20 minutes. He almost didn't reply, but he did. When they met, she was nothing like the other investors. No expensive suit, no theatrics. She asked about the idea. Then she asked why it mattered. He paused, because no one had ever asked that before. And so, for the first time, he told someone the truth. He spoke about rejection, about not being born into power, about watching someone he loved choose money over dreams. He said, "I want to build something no one can buy their way into. I want people like me to believe they can win without being born lucky." She didn't interrupt once. When he finished, she leaned back and said, "You're not pitching a company, you're pitching a future." Then she offered a deal. Not much, but enough. Enough to breathe. That night, when the wire came through, he didn't celebrate with champagne. He didn't even leave the office. He sat on the floor and wept not from joy, but from relief. Not because someone finally believed in him, but because he had kept going long enough to meet someone who did. The months that followed were a blur of motion. He hired 2 developers, found a cramped shared office above a bookstore, learned how to lead, how to delegate, how to fail fast and recover faster. There were bugs, delays, PR disasters, crashes that wiped user data. But there were also milestones: 10,000 downloads, a small article in a local paper, beta testers who sent feedback filled with hope. He worked 20-hour days, not because he had to, but because he couldn't stop. He had tasted momentum. It was addictive. He didn't attend weddings, missed birthdays, ignored holidays. He poured himself into the work, not to escape life, but to rebuild it on his terms. And yet, in the quietest hours, when the screens dimmed and the world hushed, she would appear again in memory, her laugh echoing down empty hallways. The way she used to touch his wrist when he was nervous. The time she said, "You don't have to be a millionaire for me to be proud." He knew now she had lied. But he also knew she had believed it once. One late evening, he walked past a boutique hotel in the city's upscale district. A crowd had gathered outside. Cameras flashed. A red carpet was rolled out for some fashion event. He was about to cross the street when he saw her. Dressed in velvet, her hand looped through the arm of the man she had chosen instead. It had been years, but she looked nearly the same. Elegant, poised, eyes flickering toward the cameras as if she belonged there. She hadn't seen him. And maybe it was better that way. But something inside him shifted. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't angry. He was curious. Would she recognize him now? Would she know the boy she left was now this man? He didn't approach. He turned and walked away, the noise of the crowd fading behind him. In his pocket, His phone buzzed with a new email. A potential partnership offer. His product was gaining traction. He smiled softly. Not because she was behind him, but because he was finally ahead of himself. The next morning, he shared his story for the first time publicly. A long social media post, not dramatic, just honest. He wrote about the pain of being left for someone wealthier, about being laughed out of rooms, about surviving nights without heat or food. He ended it with a line that would be quoted for months. Some people build walls to keep the world out. I built a company to prove I belonged in it. The post went viral. Not because it was tragic, but because it was true. He began receiving messages from people across the country, young dreamers, underdogs, kids with no rich uncles or backup plans. They thanked him. They said they finally believed in something, that they finally believed in themselves. He replied to every single one. His team grew. The office moved to a better space. Investors came with bigger checks. But the pace never slowed. He still worked as if he had something to prove, not to the world, but to that boy on the rooftop all those years ago. The one who was told love wasn't enough. He had learned to turn loss into leverage. To build from betrayal. He wasn't chasing revenge. He was creating redemption. And still, deep down, a quiet thought persisted. He wondered if she ever missed him. If she ever lay awake in silk sheets, wondering what might have been had she just waited a little longer. But he never let that thought linger long. He had more to build, and he was just getting started. The sun dipped low over the city skyline, casting long golden shadows through the tall glass windows of the auditorium. The space buzzed with excitement. Young entrepreneurs, reporters, and industry veterans filled the rows, clutching notebooks, tablets, and anticipation. On stage, a massive screen displayed a single name, now synonymous with success, grit, and self-made power. He stood behind the curtain, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit. No longer did his sleeves hang loose or his hands tremble. It was calm in his breath, weight in his stance, and steel in his gaze. A stage manager whispered that he was on in 1 minute. He nodded, eyes fixed on the screen. The logo that once lived in his head and notebooks was now the face of a company that had surpassed valuations, defied predictions, and rewritten rules. He didn't smile. Not yet. His success wasn't something he wore like a crown. It was something he carried deep, grounded, earned. As he stepped onto the stage, the room erupted. Applause echoed off the walls, a thunder of admiration. Lights bathed him in warmth, cameras flashed, but his focus stayed inward. This was not about spectacle. This was a moment of reckoning. He looked across the sea of faces, and then there she was, front row. She looked the same, and yet entirely different. The shine in her eyes was dimmer now, replaced by something more grounded. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a tension behind her stillness. The man beside her wasn't the one she left with. No smug smile, no boastful presence. She had come. Alone. He continued speaking, undeterred. The keynote wasn't about numbers or graphs. It was about failure. About falling and rebuilding. About those moments when no one claps, when no one sees. He spoke about the months he spent invisible, about the nights he counted coins to buy coffee, about the rejection that broke him but never stopped him. You don't need permission to rise, he said near the end. You just need refusal to stay down. When the applause returned, louder this time, he stepped off the stage and vanished into the hallway before anyone could catch him. The crowd remained behind, buzzing about his words, but he needed airspace to breathe and remember. She found him near the side exit, where soft light painted the corridor in amber. I almost didn't come, she said. He turned, slowly. Number. Anger. Just a long, quiet look. Her voice was softer than he remembered. Fragile, almost. I saw your name everywhere. Headlines, interviews, awards. And yet, I never reached out. I didn't know what to say. He didn't reply. Not at first. He waited. She continued. You changed. He met her eyes. I had to. A silence passed between them, filled with all the things neither dared to say. She looked down, twisting the ring on her finger, not the one from years ago. Something simpler. I was wrong, she whispered. About everything. About what matters. About you. There was no vindication in his face. No smirk. Just a slow breath. Was angry once, he said. Hurt, not because you left, but because you left thinking I wasn't enough. Her eyes glistened, and she nodded. I didn't understand then. I was afraid. I wanted certainty. I thought love had to come with guarantees. And now? Now I know, she replied. Some things are worth waiting for. I just ... Didn't wait long enough. He looked at her, truly looked, as if trying to find the girl he once knew beneath the years. She was there, but faded. And he? He had become someone entirely new, sculpted by pain, refined by persistence, hardened by loneliness, and softened by purpose. I never hated you, he said. Not even when it would have been easier to. She took a step closer. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I stayed? His answer was quiet, but firm. I would have never become this. She nodded again. Tears welled, but she held them back. Is there any chance we could start again? He paused. The question lingered between them, delicate and dangerous. He thought of the years he clawed through failure, the moments he stood alone, the version of himself he had fought to become. This life, this strength, it wasn't built to win someone back. It was built because he stopped needing to. No, he said gently. But thank you for being the reason I had to find myself. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't final in hate. It was closure in its truest form. She smiled faintly, eyes shimmering. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I always believed you could do it. I just didn't believe enough. He nodded, accepting the truth in her regret, but not bound to it. Then, just like that, she turned and walked away. No drama. Number. Lingering glances. Just a quiet goodbye. He returned to his office later that evening. The city glowed beneath him from the windows of the high-rise. His assistant left a file on the desk. Potential acquisition offers. Numbers that once felt like fantasy now looked normal. He set them aside. He sat down, turned on his laptop, and opened a blank document. He began to write, not code this time. Not a pitch, just thoughts. Once, she left me for a rich boy. But in losing her, I found the only wealth that truly matters. Purpose, peace, and the quiet power of never giving up. He saved the file, leaned back in his chair, and exhaled. Below, the city pulsed with life. Somewhere, new dreamers were being broken. Somewhere, another young man was being told he wasn't enough. He closed his eyes and promised silently to show them all. There's always a way. The night air was cooler than usual, wrapping the city in a quiet hush as streetlights flickered one by one. Inside the penthouse office, the walls of glass framed a skyline that shimmered like a galaxy. It was well past midnight, but he hadn't left. The room was still, except for the faint ticking of a clock and the soft hum of a ceiling vent. Papers lay untouched on the desk, his phone on silent, his laptop asleep. He stood near the window, arms folded, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Behind him, awards adorned the shelves. Headlines framed on the wall told a story the world believed, a story of grit, genius, and glory. But tonight wasn't about accolades. It wasn't about deals or valuations, or being on the cover of a magazine. Tonight was about something else, something quieter. Earlier that day, He'd received a letter. Not an email, not a message. An actual handwritten letter in a plain envelope with no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. Every curve of every letter carried a memory, a tone, a silence between lines that spoke louder than words ever could. She hadn't tried to see him again. She had written instead. He hadn't opened it until hours later, when the office emptied, and only the echo of footsteps reminded him that he was alone again. The letter was brief. A single page, she wrote of. Regrets not the dramatic kind, but the subtle ones that sink deep and stay. She admitted to losing herself in the illusion of ease. She confessed that she had envied his purpose long before she left. That while she'd chased a life of luxury, he had pursued meaning, and it showed in the way he carried himself now. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for love. Just for him to know that, even from afar. She had finally come to understand the difference between comfort and fulfillment. He read it once, then again, then tucked it away in his drawer without a word. He didn't cry. He didn't smile either. What he felt was more difficult to name, an odd mixture of warmth and ache. Closure, perhaps, or something close. When the sun rose, he walked the city alone. No chauffeur, no suit, just a hoodie and sneakers. People passed without recognizing him. He liked it that way. He moved through streets that once held the ghosts of his struggle, coffee shops where he worked without buying anything, bus stops where he rehearsed investor pitches, corners where he'd waited out rejection with clenched fists in his coat pockets. Everything had changed, and yet, in some strange way, everything remained the same. He stopped at a small bookstore tucked between high-rise towers. The place hadn't changed since college. Dust still clung to the windows. A tiny bell above the door still chimed. He stepped inside, welcomed by the smell of paper and time. An old man at the counter looked up and nodded in recognition, as if no time had passed at all. He walked past shelves he once browsed during sleepless nights, hunting for answers in biographies, searching for clarity in borrowed wisdom. At the far end, he found the same wooden chair where he used to sit with a notebook in hand and dreams. Too big for the room. He sat down. He pulled his notebook from his coat pocket. Not a device, not a digital screen, just paper, just ink. The same way he started. He turned to a blank page and began to write not a business strategy, not a plan, not even a thought about her. He wrote a question. What now? For years, his life had been defined by what he didn't have, who he'd lost, what he needed to prove. He had climbed, fought, endured, built, and he had won. But he realized now, in the silence of that bookstore, that winning wasn't the end, that it was the beginning of something else. He stayed there for hours, writing thoughts, sketching ideas, drawing maps not of companies, but of people, young dreamers like the one he once was, struggling under the weight of their beginnings. He no longer needed to be seen. He needed to be useful. The world had enough men in suits. It needed builders, believers. Later, he returned to his office, not to sign contracts or review earnings, but to meet a boy no older than 20, sitting nervously in the waiting room. He had read the viral story, had sent a message asking for advice. Most never got replies, but this one had caught his eye. The boy's message wasn't about money. It was about belief. He didn't want success handed to him. He wanted a path. They sat across from each other, the mentor and mirror. One filled with stories, the other with questions. And he gave them freely, not polished answers, not empty motivation, just the truth, that heartbreak could be fuel, that betrayal could be blueprints, that pain could be a teacher. And most of all, that no one could define your worth unless you let them. . As the boy left, eyes wide with something between hope and disbelief, He smiled quietly for the first time in days. Later that night, back in the solitude of his apartment, he poured tea, not coffee. Sat on the balcony, not the desk. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't check the markets. He just breathed. Below him, the city pulsed with millions of lives colliding, separating, beginning, and ending. Somewhere, someone else was being left behind. Somewhere, someone else was being told they'd never make it. Somewhere, another version of him sat in a dark room, holding heartbreak like a stone. He raised his cup in the air, as if offering a silent toast. To all the ones who stayed behind. To all the ones who kept going anyway. To the ones who were told they'd never become anything and still dared to dream. The wind shifted, and he knew he wasn't chasing anything anymore. He was leading now.